Well, I tell you, I'm a little too old for all of this. I like have no body clock anymore, and it's getting a little tiring.
Yeah, well, next week, well, is the last week anyway. There'll be a break. Mind you, you have a visa, so. Okay, let's get on to today's business. I originally wasn't going to get into this. It was one of a number of things, and by the way, excuse the sound of the banging. I can't do anything about that. It won't last forever. As I was saying, I didn't know whether I would introduce this. I had a number of things that I wanted to talk about in relationship to base. And I felt that the way in which this whole program had progressed, that it was something that I think would be important to see, important to understand. So without any further ado, while they're banging, I'll just let you look at this for a minute. I do enjoy graphing, and this one was particularly interesting. I developed a whole set of these graphings because I was doing studies based on relationships in chains between personality and design. And you can see what's illustrated here is that you've got two chains. That is, you've got a personality chain, and you can see that it's line 5. It starts with line 5. And you can see you've got a design chain, and it starts with line 1. So obviously, we're dealing with a 5-1 profile. Here is a classic 5-1 profile. If we go to the next layer, what we're looking at is that, we get to see the colors and the tones. So, for example, we see that the colors are the same. They're both 1s, but the tone is different, the 1 to the 5. But what I really am here to focus you on, obviously, is base. And one of the things that you'll notice about the relationship between personality base and design base is that we have a shift. And the shift, as you can see, here on the personality, you got a first base, so you shift backward one step to the 5 in the design. Here you have personality second base, and you can see that its design is shifted back, and it is the 1. The 2 back to the 1, the 3 back to the 2, the 4 back to the 3, the 5 back to the 4, and then all over again, the 1 back to the 5. And you can see the progression and the way in which it works. In other words, the personality base always has a design base that is one base behind it. And this is called base shift. And obviously it's something that it is deeply significant when you think about the fact that we are a binary consciousness. And as a binary consciousness, we have an intrinsic relationship that has to be established between this side and that side. That is the work of the magnetic monopole in holding us together in this illusion, holding us together from the separateness of what design and personality are as crystals. They're very different from each other. They're different in the tonal relationship to the color frequency, as an example. They're different from each other. They are going to receive their, how shall I put that? Their imprinting moment at different times. They're 88 degrees apart in terms of, the programming agency of the neutrino stream. And when you're looking at the base level, because we see base in its dimensional facility, then what we're seeing is that even at the deepest level that we can look at in our programming, we do not have resonance, we do not have a natural connection between the personality and the design. As a matter of fact, what we end up with is very interesting variations. And it's these variations that are so fascinating because, in a sense, it tells us a lot about what ultimately may be interpreted as the foundation of a kind of struggle within the self. And obviously this struggle is real. I mean, it's real. That is, the struggle is real in the sense that, we have a personality that through conditioning has the assumption that it rules the life and makes the decisions. And, this is a conflict with what in fact is the necessary mechanic for the vehicle, which is to be guided by the design consciousness. There are these fundamental tensions that are there between personality and design. This is one of the easiest ways to understand, that personality was something brought into the vehicle. It is not something that took part in the design of the vehicle, the emergence of the facility of the vehicle. It is simply the passenger consciousness, and as such has a totally different relationship to the vehicle itself than the design does. Obviously, they're very different from each other. And you can see that they are always, and that's an absolute, they are always different from each other in a progression. And it means that there are certain interesting things that we can note about a human being. And again, I caution you, this is a very, very deep level of knowledge, and I'm showing you the relationship between the most fundamental non-personal level of programming, which is what base is, and the way it can impact in the life itself. But it doesn't mean it is the bedrock of some kind of analytical tool, because one has to be careful with such things at this level. We have no access whatsoever in that sense to base. And the way in which base frequency operates is that, it is part of establishing the universal illusion more than anything else. And yet, because it's so, that there is this interesting difference between whether you are a first base personality or you're a second or third or fourth or fifth, and it has to do not simply with that those are unique dimensional filters, but in fact they have to work in relationship with certain specifics on the other side. And what's interesting about it is they're always matched this way. They're always matched this way. So let's begin with the very first one. It's over here. What we're looking at is, we're looking at the dimension of movement. We're looking at this uniqueness, the establishment of uniqueness. So here is the underlying dimensional frequency of the personality, the establishment of individuality, the establishment of uniqueness, and that you can see that its design is here. Its design is this direct connection between personality. This is what one might say a relatively beneficent construct. See, we have two different kinds of constructs in this. That is, two different ways in which this works. One is that there is, it's actually, if I'm specific, it's actually three. That is, here the connection between a corner and the center, here a connection between the corner and the center, here a connection on one side only, and then here, the no man's land, the most difficult in that sense configuration, because there is no natural relationship between the personality dimension and the design dimension. It's something that I don't think so much on the personality side, but certainly on the design side, relative to something like PHS, that this may be an interesting indicator of certain physical potential areas of interest, that may emerge because of this. Obviously, they're going to be very different in the way in which they operate. This has never been, I've never shown this to anybody. I've never discussed it. I've never taught it. There's all the other things that we have shared. These are things that, I have covered this ground many times now in my career in working with juxtaposition theory and teaching aspects of juxtaposition theory. And in recent years, I've had a couple of good base courses. But you see, this is another level of working with base. And it really is something that is research-oriented. That is, it's something that needs to be seen observationally. One of the things that is emerging in the knowledge now is that because we are working at deep levels and because I am training people to understand chains, so far, chain knowledge has been tone, color, line. This is the deepest level that anyone has gone into chains. And you can see here that it is years now that I am working with trying to get a grasp of the full chain process. I'm particularly grateful to the help of Andrea. I mean, she's not here, but she is downloading these classes. She did some tremendous Excel layouts. Part of these images up here, in fact, are borrowed from that, in which there is, a visual of every single potential chain from base to line. And, it is here in that world of this movement that you begin to see dynamics like this, the importance of base shifting. It has no importance now, by the way, in the sense that the value of this information is going to take years to uncover. Years. And if there is time to devote the teaching time to it, because it gets quite obscure, as you well know, coming down to this level, you're getting into the edges of the knowledge. I mean, for me, all of this is in essence the way in which I teach quantum mechanics, the way in which the underlying relationships work, and it takes digestion and imagination to begin to move this information upward, because you see, it's not just a question of, well, isn't that interesting that there's a base shift? But then again, it looks like, that there are other things that can happen. And of course, here you can see a classic example is that this fifth base from the first back to the 5, that its tone is 5. And the others in the shifting, their tones are 6. So there's going to be a difference, obviously, particularly on the design side, between 5th and 6th tone. The way in which the cognition is going to operate. So the cognition is going to be differentiated. But will all the 1/5s in a particular profile, will they all get all the tonal possibilities or not? And it goes on and on. There are all kinds of tracks that need to be discovered. Now, of course, that's not something that is intended to be done manually. I am working very hard in that sense in providing the direction for the development of statistical chain program, because of course we're working on being able to create software for PHS and for rave psychology. And because that is being built in, even though that is tone to line rooted, the infrastructure will actually work from the base up. And it will also allow us to create a program to analyze statistical commonalities in the construct, that is, in the mathematics itself, so that we can begin to see how many different things are at work. By the way, you'll discover it is quite remarkable how different it is. There are certain transitional profiles that all transitional profiles, in fact, are missing a certain left-right combination. I mean, there's all kinds of things that emerge when you see the statistics. So, again, I don't want you to take any of this out of proportion, because ultimately the only way that we're going to be able to have interpretive values is when we understand the full mechanic, that is, the actual dynamic. What is the relationships, the mathematical, numerical relationships between the personality and design, and then to be able to look for these anomalies, that is, well, they're not anomalies, they're just simply, inner patterns that are there. There's no question to me that if I think about the larger process, in other words, how is, because it is the center of my thinking in this program, how is the illusion created in that sense? And that the answer to begin with is that it's created through the filtration of base. And then it seems to me that in fact what we have is that without base shifting, it would not be possible. In other words, the base shift, regardless of what kind of base shift it is not in that sense a negative, nor should it be, seen that way. And I don't think that we can see the base shift in terms of even just the schematic of the relationship of one to the other, because there is a quantum in that, obviously. It's part of the, it's part of the holistic being that is pulled together by the monopole. So there is this quantum that takes place where there is, there is a whole that's much greater than the sum of these parts. There's something that happens because of this. It's not simply that there's a dilemma here, but something else must take place in order to compensate for this, this movement. In other words, there has to be another way, that there is a connection system that works. It's very interesting. The other thing that's so interesting is to see how the symbols keep, the movement of the symbols, as you watch them, because it's sort of like watching the, in profile, where you have this shifting that's taking place underneath. The 1-3 becomes the 1-4, the 1-4 becomes the 2-4, and underneath you have this shifting. Well, there appears to be this, this stability on the surface. And of course, it's interesting because what you have here is that as each step moves, it jumps in its step from being the personality number one to being the design number one. You notice this shift. It is an exact repetition of the pattern rolling through. Again, there is a significance, obviously, in that. And of course, here is how you see the chain of how each of these, connect to each other. In other words, in essence, they're all part of, what in fact, if I drew it this way, could be seen as a spiraling mechanism. You can see how everything is just spiraling through from these two poles, moving along all the way down. I just enjoy seeing, seeing the way things work. And then I look at certain of these aspects and I think, now that's interesting. It strikes me as these two here. I think that this, in a sense, is a kind of norm. I don't know how else to express that, because again, I have, this is as new to me as it is to you. I just felt like sharing it. But this here, now this is something that is really different. It's really different. And, it is the only example of what is, any of these corners being connected to each other. And this relationship between being and evolution. The body and the mind. And you can see that there must be something. I mean, it's just speculation. But, this body-mind is fascinating. First of all, it's perfect, if you know what I mean. I mean, here is mind, connected to the personality. It is a very, very interesting thing to look at it in that sense. But this movement, to being, the body and the mind. So my assumption is that when that gets to the surface, that you have a very different relationship between this personality crystal and this design crystal at some level. And again, I don't know what that leads to. The other thing is that I don't know, for example, wait a minute, please. Let me correct that for a moment. I got carried away here. Here is the link. And what I wanted to say was that it was backwards. Okay, so let me do this again. You scratch all that, Okay, so here's the 2-3 combination that I was referring to. Here's our 2-3 combination. What's interesting is that it's reversed. That's the point I wanted to make. You can see that this is mind, and the mind is on the design side, and this is body, and the body is on the mind side. That's what I meant by this is a very unusual configuration. In other words, there is, in a sense, at least logic would dictate that there is an unusual relationship in this base shift, an unusual relationship ultimately between the personality and the body. And I don't know what that means in fact. I mean, we'd have to explore that. It is a matter of statistically looking at that and seeing, what do we get to see from that? Because again, from an analytical point of view, there's very little I can say. I'd have to see it all within, a larger configuration, even to give a mechanical perspective. But it is fascinating to me that you've got this, it's perfect, if you know what I mean. It's just perfect. It is, each has the other, and it's linked to each other, and you've got this very, very unusual base shift. Where, the other four, these are mirrors of each other in a sense. I mean, the kind of function, but it's also interesting that, it is this other side, because that's what we're looking at, this side over here. It's this other side as opposed to this one where there's this direct relationship in the base shift, and this side there is no direct relationship. I mean, it's just, interesting to speculate about why in that sense. Why is it in that way? These obviously are very important, these beings, in being able to feed what is the synthesized illusion. They have the deepest connection in that sense to the illusion mechanism itself. But very different from these two who are, bound to each other in this, this very interesting configuration. And then, of course, you have the other. And I assume that this is the tension necessary. There's a necessary tension between, the mind and individuality. There is a necessary tension that is there between the ego and the body. How to interpret that tension? I don't know. All I can do is speculate on the fact that in order for the mind and individuality, in order for the mind to escape homogenization, in order for individuality to emerge, that obviously a lot of other things have to come into the mix. One of them is the body itself. I mean, it is this forming of what you're seeing in those is this, is this basic cross. That's what these two are. You're looking at this basic cross without the illusion in the middle. So this is really the establishment, if you will, of the framework of illusion is here. So that is very positive in its function, how it's felt between the personality and the design, what the result is on the surface. For example, this may be difficult psychologically. It may not be a problem physically, but it may be something interesting in its impact psychologically. Hard to tell until we have enough research data. After all, it will take a long time before the base level of knowledge can be integrated. People can barely integrate color. Quite frankly, people can barely integrate line. There's no rush. These are for human design scientists. These are for people who are, simply, part of their process is to need to see the whole thing laid out. And as to application, all of this is theoretical. Let's be clear. I can be very rational and empirical about the surface of the body graph. Statistical verifications, historical verification, all those kinds of things. But that is based on a surface level of interpretation of the graphic. Now, obviously, at this level, only now are we beginning to put color knowledge out in a general sense. Only now are levels of tone for those working in PHS and rave psychology becoming tools that they can use in the mechanics. It's all the beginning of, what I began 4 years ago, which is, I decided to dedicate what then I thought would be 14-year process. I assume that it'll be around that. To working at the deep levels of the knowledge, because I had spent so many years working on the surface. It will take time before the theoretical knowledge that is available here at the base level can be integrated into the larger knowledge base and become useful information. Please don't take my speculations at this point as anything that you can effectively use as a tool now. It isn't about that. It is about beginning to understand the mechanics at the deepest level that we can get to in human design. This is the deepest level in the mechanics that we can get to in terms of just structure. Here it is. Now, obviously, there is an enormous amount of information that needs to be extrapolated out of what is this, what for me is one of those great, extraordinary illustrations. I think there are very few. For me, this is a formula. When I look at this, in the same way that a physicist or a mathematician lays out a formula. This for me is the formula. It is graphically the clearest way to understand the nature of being. That is the nature of being in terms of the five-dimensional juxtaposition field. And formulas are beautiful because of their symmetry and their aesthetic. But at the same time, the work of extrapolating out of that, in other words, take the formula and examine the formula in many different ways, and put the formula to work and to test it and to experiment with it and all of these things. This is quite a process. We're in a very special place in what I amusingly dub rave physics. We're right at the core of things. You see, base shift is something that is very, very, very significant in a cosmological sense. I think it's the foundation of dualism. It seems clear to me that, this is what base shift produces. It produces a fundamental dualism, a dual-dimensional filtering field. And the very duality of the totality is not something that you find in a single crystal. That's the thing that's so interesting, is that this dualistic illusion is something that emerges in the juxtaposition of personality and design. And that you can see that this is the whole, duality program at work. So for me, base shift, it's something very special. It just is. It lays this fundamental, and it's interesting the way it's done. I mean, the left side and the right side are exactly the same, but there's a shift. There is an essence. Their movements are coordinated, but out of alignment. So it is it's a mirror in a way. In a way, it is. Yeah. I mean, you see, if they were exactly the same, nothing would exist in the illusion. See, that's what's so interesting. It's like the 88 degrees of the sun, retrograde. If it was 90 degrees, there would be no life. You wouldn't have changing profiles. You'd be locked. Nothing would move. There would be no spiral. There would be no chain. No need. See, this is, this is at the very, very deep end of contemplating the nature of being. This magic of the different, it has to do with beginnings. I mean, it has to do with the start of things. It reminds me of the ox and the rat. The design being the ox and the personality being the rat. It's like the ox in the Chinese tradition is a flood story, and the gods come to the ox and tell the ox first. They love the ox, its duty to its service on the plain. And while the gods are telling the ox about the coming flood, there's a rat nearby that overhears this. And of course the ox is a slow creature plodding along. And the rat goes racing ahead and gets there first, which is why the Chinese calendar begins with the year of the rat, followed by the year of the ox. And when you look at the design, you can see that it started first. I mean, if you look at it the way I'm laying out the configuration, I mean, you can see that the very first line color, the very first at the beginning of this 5-1 profile, because it's the very beginning of the 5-1 profile, you start off with this 5 here, this is this 5. Right? The design, in that sense, starts first. We know that. The design starts in the vehicle first, starts building the vehicle first. It's there with the monopole, doing the work, building the construct. The mind, the personality comes in late, races ahead, so that by the time that the vehicle emerges into the life, the personality is so far ahead of the design it thinks it controls it. The personality, in the configuration, we say 5-1, the personality ahead of the design. And you see, when you think about it in the sense of movement, the design starting first, and the personality moving ahead. But the moment that the personality gets to a certain point ahead of the design, we know what that point is. It's 88 degrees of the movement of the sun. They get locked into a symmetry. And that symmetry produces this shift. It's interesting just to think about it. And this is duality. The very basis of, the very basis of illusion. Quite something to look at. Okay, I'm going to open up the rest of whatever time we have left, 15 minutes or so, to any questions or speculation, because I've really gone as far as I can go with this. I felt that this is something that you should see and be able to begin thinking about.
Well, it's a little overwhelming. I think I have to digest it, but I do have a more surface-related question, which is what you mentioned about the nodes connection. When you see somebody's nodes and somebody else's Sun Earth, there's a karmic link, and I wondered what the fractal business was with that and how exact it was, if the nodes had to be the same line number and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a common relationship. As a matter of fact, it's karmic, but it's limited. That is, it's not. It may have, time frame wise, it could have arisen, not that long ago in that sense, past lives, if you want to get into all that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, nodal relationships to Sun-Earth relationships, there's always a connection. I mean, there just always is a connection. And, the more accurate, that is, the more resonance there is, same line, same kind of thing. Yeah, you can see it. I have that with my daughter, with Sarah. We're both nodal 4323s. And we have exactly the same configuration, exactly the same lines, except they're reversed. Her south node is my north node, and so forth. And it's, we've watched how that has worked in our lives. I mean, it's very interesting what happens when you have these kinds of these kinds of bonds. So I always use it as an indicator of, the only time I actually pay attention to that is in relationships, by the way, because it's an indicator that there is something beneath the surface that is probably stronger than any of the dilemmas on the surface, and if you can just get to that place, you can do a lot of healing in a relationship.
So, is there any mechanical indicator that you are exactly sort of base-to-base fractal from the center connected? I mean, okay, so you've got the nodes indicating something, and if you then looked and saw that there was a shift down in the bases of the personalities, would that be a kind of another edge to it?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, nodes, what the nodes represent is a specific environment, and if you're seeing correctly and you're operating correctly, then in that environment are going to be, the forces that you're going to meet are the forces that are correct for you. It also means that if somebody has their Sun-Earth, their being connected to your nodes, it means obviously, because you know them already, it means obviously that they are beings that are going to be things you see. That is, they're going to be part of you're seeing dynamic, because they're going to fit into that world that you're designed to see. I think if we're talking about trying to find an understanding of fractal relationships, I think it's premature. And I think it's premature because until we begin to get a holistic view of what the combination is, what we're looking at here, that is, but what we're looking at here, that is base shift, but taking base shift all the way up to the level of the totality and the person's design, and all of these kinds of things that are necessary. Until we understand what nuance that brings to the surface, and that is there are, these combinations, and you can see that there are these repeating combinations that we have to begin to understand as they emerge on the surface. We don't know what the difference is between a 1-5 or a 2-1 or a 3-2 or a 4-3 or a 5-4. This is a whole different kind of, this is dimensional profiling, if I can put it that way. And we don't know what that means until we see it holistically. So it's very difficult to, to speculate on that. Again, one of the things about, there's this spectrum in human design. One side there is the deeply synthesized simple. And on the other side is these, incredible areas of deconstructed information in order to be able to establish the science of this knowledge, in order to be able to give a grounding, a deep grounding to anyone who wants to truly explore this knowledge. All of the aspects have to be unveiled. And in doing so, obviously, there are many things that we learn, there are many things that we can begin to develop as tools, because that's what mechanics provides, like PHS, like race psychology. I assume that ultimately there will be the potential of application of this kind of knowledge. But again, it begins with seeing that it has to be observational now. I mean, one of the advantages for me in being able to share this with you is that you'll take that opportunity, some of you, to go examining charts and looking at people and checking out what their base shift is and thinking about that in relationship to themselves. It's significant. By the way, with the download for this class today, I'm going to include the XL graphics that will allow you to look at every single chain that there is in the system. That should, it'll give you a nice tool to play with, and quite something to muse over, because Anyway, I'm still open to your questions.
Well, this isn't so much a question as just a reflection or something. I'm kind of looking at, I'm a 2 base and looking at this one, and there's not a natural connection, nor is there with the 4 to the 3. I'm kind of thinking that we're the laboratory for humanity with this. And it's almost as if it's a dynamic tension. The program keeps us homogenized so that we have constant stress on the system, so that we keep evolving, so that we can increase the Maya, blah, blah, blah. And I think with the 3 to the 2, it's almost like it gets encoded. They're the ones that start the encoding. And when I look at this 3 and 2 and the 4 and 3, it reminds me of the Aeron and both the mammalian circuitry and the heart circuitry. It's going to have an enormous tensile strength to really carry what it has to do. And then with the 5, it just gets it back into the whole pool, just gets it back so that it can all be reflected on in those 2 that are the 1 to the 5 and the 5 to the 4.
Yeah, my feeling about these two is that, there's this tradition. It's been around a long time. I don't know how many, I mean, they're called the pillars or the keepers, often referred to as the keepers. Those beings supposedly that hold an aspect, a basic foundation aspect of the world, if they were to die, blah blah blah, it would all fall apart. And I really see them because it's the four corners expressed as tension and dynamic. And I think these two together, they have a very similar role. That is, they are much more sacrificial in their nature, and that may mean that there is a potential of acceptance that is there that may be unusual. Who knows? I mean, again, I can only speculate on that, but it's clear to me that they really represent the forces that establish the parameters of the Maya, and and then you can see how they how they integrate together in that. That is, for example, that the design that is here becomes the the design here that integrates into the illusion, and the movement, that's here again, the same thing, that movement then gets aligned into the illusion here. So this is this whole system here. It's why very different from this. I mean, that's really, there is certain methodology that one can see in the others. All right, Jacques, let me see what your question is. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is the monopole, it is frequency, and obviously it is again the monopole that is calling in the personality crystal. So it's going to be, the monopole in its relationship to the 5 that calls in the 1. It's the 1 that calls in the 2, and the 2 that calls in the 3. I mean, it's just, it is. That's correct. Okay, Adrian. Yeah, it seems to me that I can actually see it in a sense. That is, again, I have to really process this I have a certain way of looking at everything and a certain way of graphically laying it out. The formula is very simple because the formula is actually rooted in the basic program, the basic illusion, which is a time differentiation or a movement differentiation, which is 88 degrees. To turn that into a basic formula, I assume is I assume somebody can do that. I just see the shift as, how shall I put this? It's built into the relationship between the design crystal and the magnetic monopole, and ultimately it is the magnetic monopole that is the agent of discrimination. So it is in fact the monopole that is going to call in the personality crystal. So, but anyway, interesting thought.
In that last comment, are you sort of adding one more stroke for the amazing capacity of the monopole?
I will never stop. I can remember, you may have even seen one of those in the earliest days when I did introductory lectures, and I would do the whole thing from the Big Bang to basic surface analysis. And I always had these set lines, and I called myself a neutrino salesman. I was, so proud to be able to present this brand new version of understanding the neutrino. But it has been clear for me for, I guess, as long as I have known about all of this stuff, that there is nothing that is more incredible than the monopole. I mean, verification of the neutrino with masses is a huge step forward, because it defines within our context the veracity of the consciousness field. But it's obvious to me that if there is still something that is yet to be completely grasped, both by me and certainly by science, is the monopole. Because it is obvious to me that the monopole is what holds the relativity and juxtaposition together in a nine-dimensional phenomenon. It is the monopole that orchestrates base shift, as an example. It's the monopole that is, through its capture frequency, brings together the this and that of design and personality, color transfer, and color information. The monopole is it is the instrument of our life. It is the instrument of our death. It is a fantastic thing. And it is. It's what's really left. It's clear to me that the domain of physics today is desperate for a unified solution to their duality of quantum and relativity. And this is the key. I mean, the monopole is the key. It is it's simply an extraordinary thing. I assume that, I have said it before, the monopole will not be discovered by any normal branch of physics. It will actually have to be a kind of biophysics. They have looked for monopoles always in the wrong places. And they have looked for monopoles in the sky. You're more likely to find a monopole in a fly, prime monopole in a fly, than in the sky. It is a very unusual thing, and to be able to observe it and measure it, to discover it, is going to take an act of genius in itself to be able to develop the experimentation. There are a number of things that I understand, for example, about the nature of the monopole and its function, that and where it is. That is, where it is in various life forms, where it is in plants, for example. Ultimately, there has to be a biological and physics combination in order to be able to develop a viable experiment to be able to determine the presence of something that is holding that illusion together. So far I've been lucky. I've lived long enough now to see the neutrino verified as mass, and maybe if the gods are very sweet to me, somewhere down the line they'll figure out and discover the monopole. We'll see. Anyway, it's my privilege actually to be able to share this with you, and to be able to give you this insight and something for you to ponder. And anyway, to all of you, it's been nice as always enjoying my morning with you, and until next time. Bye for now.